Hi, I'm David Moll from clearingthevision.com, and my review today is of the Canon EF 35mm f2.0. It's this little prime that I've got mounted on the 5D here. So it gets a bit neglected really. On Amazon you'll see there are like 1,500 reviews for the Canon 50mm f1.8, the nifty 50. And this thing gets, what, about 300 reviews I think? And it's a shame because it works well for two main reasons. Firstly, let's look at it in terms of the use on crop cameras, say like the 7D or any of the ones with an APS-C sensor, so a 1.6 ratio magnifying sensor, so not the full frames. This lens on that type of camera works out at around a 56mm, something like that, and it's f2.0. And you'd be hard pushed to find another affordable way of getting to a more or less 50mm field of view without spending a large amount of money on a crop camera. So that 50mm field of view is seen as the standard. It's the one that supposedly your eye sees at. And if you're looking for a fast prime that actually hits that range, including the crop factor, then this is well worth looking at for $300 or so. But I find it works really particularly well if you're on a full frame body where you get the full 35mm view. Now it's true that there are quite a lot of zoom lenses that cover that range, including of course the L series ones, the 24-105 and the 24-70. And even the 24-70 stops out only at f2.8. And so having it at 2.0 gives you the extra narrow depth of field, better performance in low light, and as you can see it's a lot smaller and more manageable than the big brick that is the 24-70. Not to mention about $1,000 cheaper. What I like about the field of view that this lens gives you is that it's very good for environmental portraits. The tendency that I had, especially when I started, was to zoom in on everything because I knew I wanted to cut out the background clutter, and so putting an 85mm on or something and like just doing a tight crop on somebody's face, for example, would eliminate the clutter, but it also eliminates the context. So it's harder to shoot with this lens because you obviously, in a small room, if it's a similar kind of distance from the subject, you get a much wider view of what's in that environment. But also for that reason, I like it a lot more. It tells more of the story. It's very good for street photography as well, where you can get a kind of broader view on things. So those are the main uses I put it to. I often shoot with this lens, the 35mm, on one body and an 85mm on another, and so I can get a narrow depth of field that I would like, say for that blurred background, or just for a fast enough shutter speed if I'm working indoors, and then I can swap to the 85mm for close-ups and keep the 35 for the broader view. Now the composition does take a bit more effort because you just make this more in it, but I find it works really well. So for $300, what do you get? Well, it looks kind of somewhere between the f1.8 50mm and the 1.4. So it's not quite as sturdy as the 1.4 50mm, if you know that lens, but it does feel a little bit more solid than the 50mm f1.8. It is made of plastic, but it does have a manual focus ring and a metal mount, so that's good. But it doesn't feel particularly sturdy, I will say that for it. But it's sharp, even at f2.0, certainly in the center. It reaches its sort of most sharpness like a lot of lenses, from 4.5 upwards. But if you're buying this lens, it's because you want to use it wide open, either for the low light performance or for the separation you get with the narrow depth of field. So you should be aware, of course, that because it's 35mm, you don't get that wafer thin type of depth of field at f2.0 that you might get, say, with the 85mm, even at 2.0, or certainly the 135mm at 2.0. So it gives you it's a little bit more forgiving than shooting the 85 1.2 or something. But you do get that narrow depth of field, especially obviously if the subject is close to you, which, because it has a wide field of view, you can get up close to your subjects and still get them in. Around the edges you do get some vignetting, especially when it's wide open. You can take that out if you don't like it, or in my case I tend to leave it in. I kind of like that feel, but obviously that's a personal choice. So let's look at the cons. Well, I touched on a couple of them. It isn't really that sturdy, and it's not weather sealed. So if you're in extreme conditions, it's probably not the one for you. And another one of the cons is that its focusing is very buzzy. I'll give you an example of that. So if I just, I don't know if you can hear that. Hopefully it's picking that up in the mic. If you're in a quiet environment, vows in church or something like that, it's a little bit distracting. If you're out on the street or they're taking photos of kids and they're chasing around, it's not really much of an issue. But it just doesn't give you the most confidence. And it doesn't have USM focusing, so it's. I didn't find it particularly slow, to be honest, but it's definitely one mark against it. It kind of needs an update. It looks like it's a very kind of old design. It hasn't really been improved recently, which is a strange thing when you consider that its nearest direct rival is the 35mm f1.4, which is like $1,300, and there's nothing in between really. It'd be a good one for Sigma actually if they were making a full frame capable 35mm lens, similar to their 50 and 85. That would definitely be worth looking at. So that's the cons as far as its sturdiness. It's slightly slow on focusing and it's slightly buzzy. And it doesn't have a full-time manual, the manual override focus. So either it's in manual all the time or it's in autofocus all the time. You can't tweak it when it's in autofocus using the focus ring as you can with more modern designs. So, as I mentioned, its rival in terms of direct competition is the 35mm 1.4, which I have used and I might do a review of in full later on. And it's a peach of a lens, I have to say. It's absolutely gorgeous. The 1.4 depth of field you get is kind of amazing, where you can be really tight on something and keep that very sharp and blur the background, but you get a big amount of background with that. So that's really a much better lens, but is it $1,000 better? It depends on your usage. If you're making money out from your photography, or if you want the absolute best, then by all means the L lens will get you there. But as I say, I mean, I've shot a lot of professional shoots with this lens, and I like it a lot. It has some slight problems, but overall, if you're looking for a fast prime, either to go on a crop body so that to get you near the 50mm, or like I say, I think its real strength is on a full frame body. F2.0 35mm lens, I think it really does the trick. So, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews later. Bye.